Debby Newslow is president of DL Newslow and Associates located in Orlando, Florida. She's the author of the ISO 9000 Quality System, Applications in Food and Technology, which was released by John Wiley & Sons in February 2001. She also authored a HACCP-based chapter included in the 2003 John Wiley & Sons release of the Food Safety Compendium. In 2013, Newslow completed her second book, Food Safety Management Programs, Applications, Best Practices, and Compliance, published by CRC Press, Taylor and Francis Group. She also wrote a chapter, Food Safety and Quality Management Systems, for the Encyclopedia of Food Safety. Debby, take it away.
Thank you. Welcome to our Food Safety HACCP Prerequisite Program presentation. This presentation will talk about the very important prerequisite programs that support our food safety programs. Definition of PRPs, the traditional definition that we've known for many years based on historical codex and other such items, is that procedures including GMPs that provide the basic environmental and operating conditions to support the HACCP plan. Certain PRPs may be used to manage and or control food safety hazards. So this will be, all depends on our hazard analysis and what we identify. But so many times when we work on our hazard analysis or our HACCP plan, HACCP program, whatever you want to call it, food safety program overall, we look at the control points, the critical control points, and possibly the preventive controls as defined in FSMA. But we forget some of the supporting programs and how important they are in our program overall. The FSMA definition of prerequisite programs is defines it as procedures including GMPs that provide the basic environmental and operating conditions necessary to support the food safety plan. Those controlling hazards could become preventive controls based upon the results of your hazard analysis, or they could just basically be a preventive, what we call a PRP, which supports the overall program. If you look at recalls in the past, there have been so many recalls, such as the peanut butter. We all know about the Peanut Corporation of America, where there was numerous prerequisite programs such as pest control, basic GMP, facility structure, that calibration, that all caused their demise. The spinach recall related to the quality of water and water treatment. Been several on pet food. It has to do with supplier management. It has to do with listeria, which is sanitation on the fresh food. There's just been so many. Ice cream. One ice cream recall that had to do with having peanuts in butter pecan ice cream. That would relate to as many as 4 prerequisite programs when you think that the supplier set in the pecans with peanuts on the pallet. They weren't caught in receiving inspection. They weren't caught during blending, and it wasn't caught through finished product testing. So there's 4 prerequisite programs right there that fail. With the melons, that had to do with equipment failure, using the wrong equipment for the purpose. When you really look at this, you see that PRPs and result cause more recalls than anything else, and really at least 90% is basically what people will say. But sometimes I think it's even higher than that. That you don't really see a lot of recalls based on a critical control point going bad, but you do find them with prerequisite programs that either are non-existent or they're not effective. Examples of prerequisite programs really can cover so many different areas. This slide talks about allergen control, GMPs, sanitation, receiving storage, supplier management is huge for prerequisite programs, and the list goes on and on. It really depends on your operation as to what your prerequisite programs are. But if you're looking at a GFSI approved CPO, which used to be schemes, they address these areas as the guidelines address these areas of as at a minimum a prerequisite program. Thoughts on prerequisite programs includes really the facts. Typically, I mean, it is a fact that your food safety HACCP program will fail if you don't have effective and reasonable prerequisite programs. You must verify your effectiveness of the prerequisite program. Is it effective? We'll talk about that more later. Um, Generally speaking, a prerequisite program covers the whole operation. It crosses multiple production lines, such as pest control, such as basic GMP, equipment, not equipment design, but facility design. It usually is not completely related to one particular process, but it can be, definitely can be. A lot of times that we will go in to review someone's HACCP program and they'll say, well, we have a hazard, but we have a potential hazard, but we don't worry about it because we have a prerequisite program that will address it and we'll keep it in control. But when we ask to see the evidence of those programs and the records and the effectiveness review, many times they're just not existent. Goals for effective prerequisite programs include having written programs, practices, and procedures using a user-friendly format, training your personnel and associates on their responsibilities and how the prerequisite program affects the process and how they are responsible and how it would affect their area of responsibility. Must monitor the conditions and practices, so something similar to doing an internal audit program or having a GMP audit program. Having corrections and corrective action program available, so if you do find a weakness or something going on with a prerequisite program that must be addressed, you can do so through either your corrections or your corrective action process. Records must be maintained to prove that you're doing what you say you're doing. Records are critical. If you've heard me speak before, I say, in God we trust, everyone else bring records. It's critical that you have records and you have them identified and they're reviewed and they're available for monitoring, for performing the PRP, and actually doing any kind of correction or corrective action required. And then you verify and you validate. We'll talk about that later also, the difference between verification and validation as related to your PRP. General practices. So the G is for general, and we see this a lot. We see good manufacturing practices, good sanitation practices, good handling practices, general prerequisite programs. We see good agricultural practices. This is basically a general overview, can be considered general, kind of an overview and just basic information. And then you get into more detail as you move into each program. And S stands for specific practices, such as standard operating procedures, sanitation standard operating procedures, which are known as SSOPs, and preventive controls. You can consider the P and specific as relate to preventive controls, which is directly related to the FSMA requirements, Food Safety Modernization Act. So GMPs really address several PRPs. A overall GMP program, it encompasses pretty much most of the individual programs that we're talking about. And GMPs really are facility-wide. They must be adhered to each day. Applies to everybody, not including maintenance and visitors and management. You see so many times when management might walk through without a hairnet, and but everybody else has to wear a hairnet. So why would they not have to? Not just because they're management, but because if it's needed to be as a protective measure, then everybody needs to wear one. Components of a GMP program, at a minimum, and this relates to the FSMA definition, Food Safety Modernization Act, which is referenced here, 21 CFR 117 subpart B, may include personnel practices, hairnets, washing hands and so forth, personal hygiene, plants and grounds, design of your plants and grounds to protect against hazards, and then maintaining your plants and grounds to ensure or to protect against hazards or potential hazards. Sanitary operations such as cleaning and sanitizing, sanitary facilities and controls, that's the process for maintaining them, equipment and utensils, processes and controls, warehousing and distribution, defect action levels, and a new aspect of the GMP as defined by FSMA 21 CFR 117 Part B, human food byproducts for use as animal food. These are all parts of subparts of GMP. Areas to address, we talk about outside premises, having a rock border around the building, having a neat and grass cut, no water puddling, having an effective pest control program. Again, no water puddling, no issues with sanitary facilities or plumbing and sewage, lighting, and so forth. Waste disposal. Sometimes it's very common to see a waste or a dumpster, something right open and exposed and overflowing right near the receiving area where you might be receiving a dry ingredient. That definitely could contribute to cross contamination. Also, water quality. Source of water. Could water be cross contaminated? And things like that. Areas to address internally, your process control area, and your production, your manufacturing environment needs to be cleanable. It needs to be kept clean. Remember, organisms need water and dirt, which would be their food. So when you keep an area clean, the organisms don't have anything to really grow on. And that's why it's so important to keep areas clean and sanitary. Equipment hygiene, formulation control, labeling, all these are areas to control. Rework and repackaging is critical. Warehouse and distribution, receiving, storage, and shipping. How do you store your products? Do you store them separately and in a manner that could not result in cross-contaminate between allergens or cross-contamination? For instance, like chemicals being stored with ingredients or packaging could be result in cross-contamination. Standard operating procedures. We get a lot of questions a lot. What do we need in SOPs? And do we need them? I always tell people, if you need to have something written that you want everybody to follow, then you need to have a standard operating procedure. But you don't need to write War and Peace. You need to have one that gets to the point and outlines everything that everyone needs to know for reference, and everybody needs to do the same way. But as little as possible and as much as necessary is what we recommend on your SOPs. When planning for an SOP, SOPs, you want them to provide consistency in training and application, demonstrate commitment to buyers and auditors and inspectors to show that you have taken the time to define the requirements. And if you want things done consistently the same way, then of course you need to have it written down and have people trained on that. But the things that everybody must do consistently is one thing, but don't overwrite down, like pick up the pen with your right hand. We've seen those over the years, seriously, that, pick up the pen, pull a piece of paper, those kind of things. You need what you need, but you don't want to make it ridiculous. You name the SOP using a descriptive action word so it can be found. With document control, it should have a unique number or a unique code, and it should also tell you what version you're at. An effective SOP will start out with a scope statement. When you write it down, you define what specifically you are going to address in the SOP and who is it written for, what area of responsibility. SOPs, what to include in them: detailed descriptions of all procedures, specified frequency, timing, sequence, or order, what materials are used if that's appropriate for the document, any descriptions of what, if something goes wrong, what corrective actions will we take. It could be as simple as notifying, quality or notifying your supervisor, or it could be more complex, like putting everything on hold and things like that. Depends on the area of responsibility. And again, the scope of the document you're writing. It should reference what records are maintained, and any kind of safety or health considerations, expected outcomes, and also measurements of effectiveness. How are we going to know that what we're doing is effective? And we'll talk about that even in more detail as we move forward. Be very careful with what I like to call wishy-washy words. But avoid the vague terms. You want to use hot water, warm water. What is warm water? It depends. If you live in Florida, it's one thing. If you live up north, it's another thing. Same way with ambient. What is ambient temperature? So be specific. Be specific with your time. You boil it for a few minutes. What does that mean? You boil it for 5 to 10 minutes. That means something, and you can measure it. So you have measurements. And how much, you don't say just dilute it. How do you know how much to dilute it? If you have an ounce per 5 gallons, that's specific. And be careful with other terms, such as bi-monthly or bi-weekly. If you look those up in the dictionary, you'll find that they could mean, for instance, bi-monthly could mean every other month, or it could mean twice a month. So you want to say what you mean, semi-monthly, twice a month, every 2 months, something like that. Be careful with terms like as necessary, when applicable, periodically, randomly. Pulling samples periodically on a random basis. I've seen that written, and that is very vague. Doesn't tell anybody what the requirements are. How long should they be? I mean, it's sufficient detail to be effective, but not too wordy, not too long. Most of the time, we recommend 10 to 12 steps. If it's longer than 10 to 12 steps, then you may need to have another document. So you just need to see how and what you really need to write down, what people really need to do and do effectively, and always do the same way. And then we go back to some wishy-washy, but we also talk about the active versus passive. Active would be apply warm detergent solution, 105 to 110 Fahrenheit, and scrub to remove the soil. A passive statement would be warm detergent solution, 105 to 110, will be applied and the equipment scrubbed. It just is more effective. It's kind of a writing technique for an SOP to do an active statement, not a we will be doing it, but we do it. Apply, or we're going to apply it, like that. Apply, not will be applied. Now, no one usually will write you up, or you have a nonconformance if you don't write it exactly as I'm describing. But we, after doing this for many, many years, we find that it's a lot clearer and more effective if we write it. So forms should be simple and user-friendly. Specify conditions and practices to be monitored. Have a space to record observations and measurements and comments. Be sure it's done at the prescribed frequency. Record the actual observation. For instance, if you want the temperature to be between 105 and 110 Fahrenheit, and you read the temperature, write it down. Don't just put a check mark or a pass or fail, right? If it's 106, say it's 106. That way, write down the actual figure. If you're checking concentrate in the chemicals and the number of drops, if it's supposed to be between 10 and 15 drops, then you write down exactly what it is. So you can tell exactly what it was when you tested it and can confirm that it's within specification. The forms, many times the form can actually be the work instruction and give directions on it. But have a place for as I said, to record the conditions and practices to be monitored, record the actual observation, any necessary corrections, so that could be in a comment section. So many times we'll find things that are out of spec, and many times it's written in red or it's circled, but there's no comment as to what was done. And people will say, well, see, the next test was okay, so that's proof that we actually adjusted it, but it really isn't proof. You need to write it down and have it on the record. Have a space for the person responsible to sign it or initial it, but make sure it's legible. Records must be legible. And a space for a signature of the supervisor to review. And again, be sure it's legible. I've seen some pretty interesting signatures. And, I've seen people having to go to court and say, okay, JR signed this. And how do you know JR? How do you know that's JR? How do you read that? And what some people will do is actually have a controlled, so I've seen it done manually, I've seen it done electronically, where they actually have a copy of everybody's name and their signature. So anybody wants to actually go back and prove it, then you can prove it. Excuse me. Raw materials. Ingredients are tough. I mean, we have to be sure, having raw materials, being sure that they're verified upon receipt, that they are what you ordered. We can only be as good as our ingredients. What assurance do we have that the supplier is producing a product that is free of food safety hazards? Garbage in, garbage out. We need to know what we're getting in, and we need to have data or have a receiving inspection plan to confirm that it's hazard free and it's what we've ordered. So consider some of these items about your supplier program. How are suppliers approved? At your site or by corporate? If corporate does it and you're just getting in material, what do you need to look for? How do you have to save samples? Do you have to do certain testing? I mean, what does the C of A say? The C of A is a piece of paper. How do we know or prove that what's on the C of A is what it's supposed to be? A lot of larger companies have do spot checking, spot sampling. Smaller companies have developed other means to follow up and monitor this. What is the evidence of what your suppliers are doing and that you've approved of? Who's responsible for it at your location? Service suppliers. A lot of times these guys are forgotten. We talk about ingredients, we talk about packaging, but what about the people that are providing you services? It's the services that relate to quality and food safety that you're concerned with. So maybe pest control, calibration, maybe testing labs, and so forth. So agree to specifications, have a letter of guarantee. Is it a high-risk item that might require an on-site inspection? And have you seen a copy of their HACCP program and reviewed it and approved it? We have so many people now, suppliers, that are calling us up and saying, they want this, our customer wants this, they want a copy of our HACCP program. What's that? So, it's interesting how this is funneling down now through the ranks to the suppliers and even to the farms. Receiving, storage, and distribution, very important. It should have well-defined, usable, what I mean is user-friendly procedures. Transportation is key. Inspecting the trucks before they're loaded, making sure that they're protected. There's no hazard why it's being delivered, especially if it's a risk item that must be frozen or refrigerated. How are they transported? Is it transported with hazardous chemicals or anything that could cross-contaminate? FSMA requires documented receiving programs when the supplier controls a hazard requiring a preventive control. Importers and domestic companies must implement receiving procedures and keep records. Utilities. Many times they've forgotten prerequisite program. Water. How is water used? Is it an ingredient? Do you use it is it a food safety contact item? I mean, you use water to clean the same surfaces that the product contacts. You use it to rinse. You use it with your cleaning supplies. Drinking water. What about ice? Is the ice made with safe water and steam? How do these items affect your product? Do they come in contact with your product, or how do you protect against cross contamination from them? Safe water supply that contacts food or food contact surfaces. That is key. Safe water supply for production of ice, cooling water system, and steam systems. No cross connections between potable and non-potable water. Are the pipes labeled? Are they separated? Are there backflow preventers on your water lines? All of this is critical to an effective water quality program. Equipment and utensils. Many times, the cleaning utensils are the things that are not clean. But right now, we're talking about utensils used in your products. So materials, general sanitation, such as scoops, spoons. How are they cleaned? Are they cleaned? Could you use the same scoop in all your ingredients, or are they dedicated? You got to be careful because it's a good way to cross contaminate between items like allergens or vitamin D, high risk chemicals. We must ensure that equipment is adequate for cleaning, that it's the right equipment for the process. I actually was in a facility not too long ago where they were using mixing a non-gluten product, and they were actually using a cement mixer that you'd get at Home Depot. And you could see in there where you look in a cement mixer that has kind of like a coating around the inside, and about half the coating was gone. So where did that go? So is the equipment designed for food manufacturing? Is it safe as a food contact surface? We laugh about some of the things we see, but it's just amazing. So we must ensure that the food contact surfaces are properly designed, constructed, and maintained, and that they are able to be effectively cleaned and sanitized. So now we go into the cleaning and sanitation that many times is a prerequisite program. And now in some instances, There could be the whole clean and sanitation program would be a PRP, but then there could be one spot in your program that you have to add this extra attention to, or you could result in a hazard. That particular area and that particular requirement could be classified as a PC or preventive control. But we're talking about the PRP right now for cleaning and sanitation. So cleaning removes the soil and product residue, while sanitizing applies a chemical that kills the harmful microorganisms. Not all the microorganisms, but the harmful ones. The reason for cleaning and sanitation is to prevent the growth of potentially harmful microorganisms on equipment and utensils. So it could include personnel hygiene and cleanliness, equipment and work area cleaning, use and storage of cleaning chemicals and equipment, work procedures and controls related to sanitation and pest control. Best practices. Always follow the proper usage procedures. Whenever possible, designate cleaning equipment by work area to prevent cross-contamination across work areas. For example, certain buckets, mops, and brushes may be color-coded, are used only in raw or unprocessed areas, while a different set or color would be used in the finished product areas, or in the warehouse, a different color, or outside. Also, always remember to use proper personal protective equipment, PPEs, when cleaning and sanitizing. You must remain safe also to yourself. PPA is required by specific chemicals in use. Read and follow label instructions. Sometimes we think some is good, more is better. That is not always true. We need the recommended dosage and use that dosage. Pest control is a common sense sanitation issue. The pest control program is a critical part of our company's overall sanitation program, which is in effect to protect all our products, ingredients, and packaging free from contamination. Pests carry and transmit disease and filth. Our consumers will never consume our products if there is any chance or hint that it may be contaminated through pest activities. Cross-contamination prevention. Potential sources, plant personnel, and examples could be employee practices. Raw materials, potential sources, we could cross-contaminate through storage and handling. So there's a lot of things that go on, and we have to really, really understand the process, understand the requirements, and do everything we can to prevent cross-contamination. Hand washing. Maintain an effective hand washing program. A hand washing facility should have the proper temperature, which is 110 or 120. You should rinse. Standard operating procedures say it's a 20-second hand wash. Train people to wash their hands effectively. We actually like to use a demonstration with an item called Glow Germ, where you put it on your hands and you put the cream. It's a cream, and you put the cream on your hands, and then you wash your hands just the best you can, and then you put your hands under a black light. And it's pretty interesting, very interesting on the areas that we miss. So it's important that we understand the process for hand washing and what it means to do a thorough, effective job washing our hands. It is said that 30% of foodborne illnesses would not even happen if everybody washed their hands properly. So this is a well-equipped sink, like the source of hot water. Pretty ingenious. Somebody sent that to one of our instructors years ago, and it's really not a well-equipped sink. And here's another example. So the sink is right by the urinal. I don't think that that's really the proper location. So we have to, this is the design issue, and we have to really use our common sense and put our thinking caps on to see really how to design and how to do it properly or effectively. Adulteration. Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act Section 402 talks about adulteration. It's very important. It bears or no product can contain any poisonous or deleterious substance which may render it injurious to our health, like poisons, like biological or physical, or is it an ingredient that is going to be allowed, but only allowed at a safe level? For instance, vitamin D. Vitamin D is very important to us, but too much of it will kill us. So these are examples of how we must ensure that food packaging, and food contact surfaces are protected from microbial, physical, or chemical contaminations. such as filth, lubricants, fuel, cleaning compounds. You know, we must use lubricants that are approved for food manufacturing, or cleaning compounds that are approved for food manufacturing. Doesn't mean that it's approved for us to drink it. It's just approved at a certain level to be used and to be managed per the label. So that's very important, and we want to make sure we don't cause cross contamination from storing non-food approved items with food grade items. Chemical control. We must ensure that the labeling, storage, and use of toxic compounds are adequate to protect food from contamination. And some examples is, you know, keep it in the original container, but if you have to put it into another container, be sure you label it properly. You have the instructions for the proper use, and you have the code or lot number from the original container so that you can track it back if you need to. Chemical storage and use. Store in a secure area. Doesn't have to be locked, it needs to be secure. Segregate food grade from non-food grade. Keep away from food equipment, utensils, and other food contact items. Use according to manufacturer's instructions. Ensure procedure will not result in adulteration of our products. Personal hygiene. FDA defined the following essential elements of a good personal hygiene program: not working when sick or infectious, maintaining an adequate personal cleanliness, wearing outer garments that protect the product from contamination, and washing hands thoroughly and changing gloves when necessary. Gloves, if I had another hour, we could talk, or maybe 2 hours, we could talk about gloves. But be sure that, you know, gloves are not a magical item that just works. Wash your hands very well before you put the gloves on, and change the gloves when they become dirty or contaminated. And depending on what you touch, if someone touched a handle to an oven with their bare hands and then you turn around and touch it with your glove, well, then you've just contaminated your glove by whatever was on that person's hand. So really, we got to think about what we do and how we do it, and apply common sense. Verification. Are you doing what you said you're doing? That's what verification is about. What do we say we're going to do, and are we doing it? So if we say we're going to manufacture at 151 degrees for 16 seconds, then that's what we're doing, and we have records to show it. We review the system, you interview the processes through auditing, review documents, confirm, review objective evidence such as records. That's saying you're doing what you say you're doing. You design the system, different ways, how often, and this is defined the frequency, who should verify. Basically, the food safety standards basically requires the food safety team. Sometimes you may have an outside expert or regulatory authority. It just depends on what the well, the regulatory authority is not the best approach, but having your food safety team or an outside expert definitely can add value. And as I said, most food safety standards require that the food safety team does this. Now, validating is that you're doing the right thing to control the hazard. So if you want to process at 151 for 16 seconds, and you're saying you're doing that to kill an organism, then you need the scientific evidence to show that 151 for 16 seconds will kill the organism that you're trying to kill. That is validation. You can do it, and you can prove you're doing it, but do you have the science behind it that shows that you're doing the right thing? And that's the validation step. ISO 22000 2005 has lists the following prerequisite programs, and these are exactly basically what we talked about earlier: layout of buildings and their utilities before construction, work area layout. So is it designed to prevent hazard or prevent contamination? Layout of other areas used by employees. So how about zoning and cross-contamination? So in order to get to the lunchroom from the raw supply area, do you have to walk through the process area where where finished product could be exposed? That could be cross-contamination. You've identified and are addressing your water sources to be sure that they're approved. Energy and supply of air. Air is something that's a lot of times just totally forgotten. And I see a lot of air sometimes where it's pushing, like it's blowing opening cartons and things like that. is that air supply safe? And how do you know that? Waste disposal, cross-contamination from waste. I mean, how is it controlled? Where is it controlled? Is it designed to be in an area so that it couldn't cross-contaminate? So this kind of goes on and talks about things that we've talked about already. So, but it's interesting to show that this is a list from one of the approved food safety CPOs. The juice HACCP, which has been around since the late 90s, they call what we call the Big Eight. Water safety, food contact surfaces, prevention of cross-contamination, which is huge. It could really addresses the whole operation. Protection from contamination, which is kind of the same thing, but looking at it from a different angle. Proper labeling, storage, and use of toxic materials, control of employee health, and exclusion of pests. So that's really where we are. I mean, it was a quick overview of prerequisite programs and their role in the operation. And I will turn it over back to Laura now.
Thanks, Debbie. This ends today's presentation. Have a good day.